Right, so December 1st, we've got 2 proposals pending. I think the first one was around this no-op lint, and I started the FCP sometime back. I think it's finished. If there's no objections, we'll close it, and Aaron will work on a implementation. This was to detect calls like clone and borrow and so forth that don't have no effect. And the other one is more interesting, has to do with changing the rules around trailing semicolons in macro rules. Basically, the problem, I guess, I wasn't really familiar with this, but trailing semicolons in a macro body are silently ignored, apparently, so that you can generate a value from here, like true, even though there's a semicolon. And
oh no, that sounds like a terrible bug.
yeah. So this proposal is basically a way for us to change it, I think. I am now paging this back in a little bit. There would be some question about, do we want to do this over an addition switch? I think probably yes, but I'm not sure. Because as it says here, many crates in the ecosystem rely on this behavior to the point where upstream. So I don't really think we can make this change without, particularly because Rust format was actually aggravating the problem without an addition. So yeah, I guess the question here is like, the question before us is mostly, if someone were motivated to take this on, is there someone else who would serve as a liaison to work with them and see it through? And I guess particularly it would require a little bit of judging the addition impact or whatever.
It seems like starting the ball rolling on the future compatibility lint and so forth can be done sort of independently of a liaison, perhaps?
It can. I would feel happiest if we actually, then we haven't really talked about this proposed new process that Josh and I were kicking around, but it kind of, the only real hurdle for doing it kind of had an idea that someone could just, if someone's interested, they can kind of just second it and start the proposal on their own, sort of. I do agree for sure that we could do implementation, experimentation. There's nothing blocking that. I'm not even sure how much of that may already be done. I guess the real question is, do we think we would want to go forward? Does someone? I think we probably would. This does feel like a pretty confusing interaction. It's not a huge priority somehow, though. But so I guess what I'm saying is, yes, Mark, I agree. We could do some implementation stuff, but I would be happier if we lined up and knew that there was someone who wanted to.
I'm willing to take, I don't know, ownership or something here. It seems like I'm basing on Aaron's statement that it's easily fixed in terms of like, it's not like a cross-cutting change or whatever. So based on that assertion, I'm willing to, say, okay, I'll mentor or whatever.
Yeah. Okay, great. I don't know that it requires like mentoring the implementation in particular. I would say more just keeping up with what's going on so we can be kept up to date.
Okay.
I mean, it may, but Aaron knows their way around the compiler, so. Okay. Well, maybe you want to jump in and leave a second or something, but we'll
Yeah, I'll do that
after. Great. All right. In terms of the project board, don't know if I usually like to go through these. I want to change, as of the next meeting, if I have some time, I wanted to change how we do this so that I would modify the script to actually go through and move comments from tracking issues into the sort of into the agenda so we don't actually go through it, and then send out messages to people that they should leave comments that they want us to review, before the actual meeting so that the script sees them, and send a reminder. I didn't do that this week. I'm just going to skip over the project board, given that unless anyone has anything they want to bring up right now, given that we have a fair amount of stuff here, we can come back to it. And I know I do have something I want to bring up, but I think it's in this list. So. Okay. 2 nominated RFCs. Okay. Who nominated this and why? Scott did. Scott, are you here?
Yes, I am. I'm trying to remember why I nominated this. I think because someone pinged about it.
Yeah, it basically looks like people may feel it's ready to go forward if we want to go forward with it. I haven't really looked at it at all, to be honest with you. But
My recollection on this one is that I don't know how much Lang actually cares in some sense. This is like cargo plus compiler, definitely. It's basically, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
My short summary of it is that it's about having command line arguments to pass the legal sets of various flags so that warnings can be given about, hey, you typoed the feature that you tried to turn on or that you tried to look for. I guess that you tried to look for in code is the only one that would actually check, which from a Lang perspective, I could argue is a quality of implementation issue, and we don't care in Lang, and that if compiler and cargo want to do it, then great. I don't know.
I was just going to say that I agree that like this is something where it's less that Lang needs to be the primary driver and more that Lang needs to sign off and be okay. In general, I am enthusiastic about more work in the area of like the portability lint and other, how do we check things about variants of conditional compilation that are not being used right now. So anything we can do to catch issues for other platforms, even though that's not the platform you're compiling for, is a substantial improvement to quality of life and ability to manage portability in a simpler fashion. So I think this is valuable. I personally think the specific proposed implementation is not the ideal one. The whole notion of let me tell you everything that might possibly be valid in advance is perhaps not the perfect solution, but the problem that's being, I think, is important.
So would we be comfortable just leaving a comment saying we approve of the goals and remove ourselves from the RFC and kind of say for the implementation question, like the final decision should be left to cargo and possibly compiler? Seems like more of a cargo, but.
Right. It'll have compiler surface area necessarily in Rust-C, but yeah, we could definitely say Lang is generally in favor of the use case and problem being solved, and modulo major changes, we'd like to keep an eye on the implementation, but generally approve of going forward without blocking on us.
I feel comfortable with that. It sounds like that's the consensus of this meeting. Anyone?
Yeah, I just said compiler because I thought that stable -c flags are a compiler question.
That is true. I think compiler would want to sign off on the interface between the two. But from the Lang perspective, okay. So I I think we can remove our T-lang from the.
I can put a comment to that since I got pinged on it.
And next is the must not await lint RFC, which has been coming out of the Async foundations and adds a mechanism like must. Looks like there's not a lot of comments on here, which is fine. Adds a similar mechanism to must use. I have read the RFC, but sufficiently far back that I've kind of forgotten the details. It looks like I nominated it, though why? Probably just to bring attention to it. I think they were requesting feedback. I'm remembering now. Requesting feedback from T-lang. I would be, modulo the name of this lint, which I guess has been bike shedded some. I feel pretty okay about it. Does anyone have concerns? Should I go ahead and kick off an FCP?
Modular naming, I don't have any concerns.
I think my biggest concern is that we've had a lot of iteration on, or we've had a lot of very sort of exploration around must use and how infectious it is. And it doesn't feel like this lint raises the same questions. I think we would answer them in the same way, but that's the most interesting Lang question to me here. And I think there's no, I don't think that this RFC addresses that directly. It's probably something we would want to consider later. But, you know, basically the question of if you define a struct that includes a must use, is it itself must use implicitly, or how much does it have to opt in? But all right, well, I will say conclusion.
Is there a place for the bike shed about the name to occur?
On the RFC?
Oh, okay.
I don't know. Or in Zulip. There's a thread. This has been discussed in the WG Async Foundation stream, so you could definitely pop in there. We should probably make a dedicated stream for it. There may already be one, I forget. I think there may be one. You have opinions.
I was trying to think of ways to avoid saying must entirely, basically, but it doesn't matter. We don't need to get into here.
That's interesting because it seems like it. The advantage would be that it connects to must use, I guess.
Mm.
If we wanted to rename, on the other hand, neither of them are truly a must relationship. But yeah, I'll ping you on Zulip about where to with the stream.
Okay.
I guess you could find it. But. So p-height issues, new warning incompatible. We're kind of on track to fix this, right, Mark?
Yeah, I don't think we need to discuss it. There's some checkboxes left, but on beta, we're reverting the PR anyway, so it doesn't really matter.
Okay. Those of you who have not checked your box, I guess that's worth mentioning. Please do so. On the PR?
Taylor, Josh, and Boats.
Okay. This is the PR, right?
Yep.
J vote without votes. Okay. Is that correct? I get you're not. I always misspell Josh's name. Anyway, all right. Nominated PRs. So turn derive into a regular macro attribute. Is anyone familiar with this? I am not. you if you can get. Wait, this is the wrong PR. Wait, what is happening? Did I like do something? I messed up this link, didn't I? I think I accidentally pasted. Okay, what is this PR? So it sounds like this is taking Derive out from the compiler as a built-in and making it a standard procedural macro using some magic, or at least I'm not familiar with this ability to ask Rust-C resolve to resolve Pez. I don't know how that works. And this has some language implications.
Particular, or wait.
Yeah, so this includes some regressions. I guess the main thing is that Derive is now going through name resolution.
It also says that two derived attributes are now expanded separately rather than together. Do you know of cases that were potentially making use of that previously? I know I've heard people talking about trying to leverage having, you know, the presence of two things being derived, having a special meaning in the expansion, but this is talking very specific. This is the fourth bullet down in the language changes I'm talking about.
Yeah, I feel like copy and clone may. I seem to recall that we specialized the clone, not specialized in the literal sense. If both copy and clone were specified, we generated a more efficient clone implementation that takes advantage of knowing that the thing is copy. I'm not sure if that's still true.
That is still true, but I don't think it's relevant for this point.
As in, it'll still happen the right way, even if you put in two separate Derive forms?
I would expect so, yeah. Or we
Yeah.
can sort of hack around it by inserting a new attribute that's unstable but allowed or something. But yeah, I think this just changes the behavior that Petrochenkov mentions around if you import something in a Derive, like you expand to a use statement, and that becomes visible for the new Derive or the next one, I guess. But
Okay.
It seems surprising to me. Like, I know it's not obvious why it wouldn't also affect copy clone without doing work to make it work. But
I suspect the architecture of copy clone probably is like setting some state or something that just makes it still just happens to work today, is my guess.
well, we're magical and we can look at all attributes, but I don't think it's too important.
yeah, we could just parse ahead, I guess. That's your point.
Mm-hmm.
Just more work, but in principle is possible. Yeah. Okay. And I see. And then you'd have to leave some extra attribute because of, in case the copy came first, kind of. Yeah, okay. I don't understand see what fully configured means. Okay, well, we can go into the details we want. Doesn't make sense to do it live. I guess they're doing a create or run now. So there's a few regressions, but not too much. Thoughts? Initial thoughts? I would be inclined to do it if we can do less. Making Derive more normal is probably good.
Surprised this wasn't proposed as a major change proposal, but
maybe in the compiler.
Yeah.
I don't recall it at all, but possible.
Yeah, I think my only concern is that my impression is that like the derive empty parentheses looks like not new behavior, but like we're not actually unifying with everything else, and that seems weird. But
Yeah, I don't really understand what that actually means yet. I may have to read over these in a little more detail. I see. This field is removed by, okay. Yeah, that is unusual, but it's sort of backwards compatibility that we do it that way.
yeah, it reads as if it isn't, so I'm confused. But
Right. Yeah, because it says it actually becomes useful, and yet, okay. That seems like it's maybe worth clarifying.
I think this is a great change, and my only concern at all would be that whether this introduces any form of performance regression. I'm digging through the PR history now to see if anybody did a perf run, but recently there was a bunch of discussion on the topic of how derives perform at scale. There were some PRs to try to improve that, but story short, having tens of thousands of structs that each derive half a dozen traits would have a major performance impact. So there was, I believe, a new test introduced into the Rusty perf suite. We should double check that it's actually there. And I would love to see this run against the perf suite with that included. If it passes that, then I certainly don't object.
Sounds like it might be, that's more of a compiler concern, but it's worth raising.
I certainly remember WinAPI not wanting to derive a bunch of stuff on all of its types because it took so long to compile, but I thought that was code gen time, not derive macro time for most of it.
Yeah, this is apparently not code gen time. It is largely derived. There's some side effects for code gen that are being looked at, like the fact that derive of partial ORD implements more functions than it may need to. But that's a separate problem.
So the question, I guess, is do we want to move to FCP? Seems like we should. There's generally positive. I mean, people don't have to check their box right away, but you might as well allow people to start checking their boxes. Josh, would you be up for that?
I can do that, and I'll also kick off a Rusty perf run.
Does anyone know what work this is blocking? I saw a note from Petrochenkov saying it's blocking other work.
I don't.
Okay.
I did see that. I don't know if he.
He had some mentions of what it's blocking in terms of other refactorings. It sounds like this change would make it easier to implement other work on derives and handling of name resolution. There was a mention early on that it'll make accessible potentially easier.
Do we need to loop in the libs team here? Because this is becoming, like, at least we should at least CC them. This is becoming part of the prelude. It's probably not a big exciting thing, but.
Sure, it may or may not need to be a full FCP for the libs team, but at the very least we should CC them.
Yeah. Do that when you write the comment. All right, let's move on. Built-in implementation of default. I think we did a move to close. We're basically still waiting on checkboxes here. I guess I should check my own box. Ta-da! All right, people.
There was some discussion on Zulip about what the alternatives to this would potentially be. And someone pointed out that Const generics should be able to address this pretty conveniently. in that you could pass the actual value rather than the type by way of the type system, and that would be more appealing.
That is my preferred approach, yeah. All right, support pub on macro rules. We talked about this last time, and we talked about the desire to at least create a kind of group or something like that. I see there's been some follow-up.
Yeah. I feel like on this one, there was a bunch of debate about like how we might migrate in the future to like do this by default in a future edition. But I think the notion of supporting pub macro rules seems simpler than the question of what do we do if we want to change macro rules to not be pub. But
Say it again.
nonetheless. It seems like there's two separate pieces of this, and we spent a lot of time discussing migration strategy previously about what would we do if we want to make macro rules without any qualifier be effectively pub self macro rules, so private. And that's a separate issue of how we do that transition, but that doesn't necessarily need to block supporting qualified macro rules. And then if you want a private one, you can do pub self. Changing the default is an addition, but this doesn't necessarily have to be.
Yeah, that seems right. I mean, there are definitely two things. I guess there might be some concern about it being confusing to support pub without it sort of being fully.
Yeah, I think Boats was against this, and I think I am too, for what it's worth.
Yeah, I'm of mixed minds. I would be somewhat against stabilizing it. I'm definitely not against landing feature support for it, or at least I haven't made up my mind on stabilizing it, but probably against.
Clarifying, against stabilizing it at all, or against stabilizing it without a more detailed spec?
I don't know how I feel about stabilizing it if we don't change the default behavior. It would depend on various things. I'm definitely against stabilizing it without some plan or spec, but none of this needs to block this PR landing. I think that's the
Sure.
bottom line.
So you might. So if there were a transition plan, then it sounds like you wouldn't necessarily object. I don't know what Boats thought, but does anybody object to the concept of this if there is a plan to transition the default?
I guess the question is, would it be exposed on Rust 2018 or only on Rust 2021, right?
Right.
I think
I would personally like to see this exposed all the way back to Rust 2015, and just the default change would be in the new edition, which that doesn't seem inconsistent with other things we've done on editions where we push the feature back, but then incompatibilities are the only thing that's held to an edition.
Right.
Well, it sounds like part of the, so you'd actually push back as well, like the support that makes that pub actually makes it have macro export semantics as well, then?
Say that again.
Well, my reading of this is that it says that when you do pub, you don't have any qualifiers at all, then it makes the macro public, and so you don't need to have macro export on it anymore.
Correct.
And you'd want that to be the thing that's, you'd want that behavior as well to be backported to 2015, right?
Yes, because today you can't write pub on a macro at all. So adding pub would be something that wasn't valid syntax, and now it would be with the obvious meaning.
Right, I'm just, my mental, at first when I first saw this, I thought it was just like, okay, this is just gonna be trivial, but in terms of, I thought I just meant the same thing. that you have if you don't include pub with the current semantics. And then I reread and realized the macro export detail is there. So I don't know what that means in terms of.
Well, it's not just, it's not completely equivalent to macro export precisely because it also switches you over into the Rust 2018 style path-based name resolution rather than the magic macros are something special that aren't normal items name resolution.
Okay.
One thing I would add is the way we did addition migration in the past is that you migrate to some intersection of the two additions, if I recall, which might imply that we have to support pub so that you can migrate like in Rust 2018 to macro rules that use pub and then go to 2021. Yeah, just a thought. And like, so there, I guess I would want to see it discussed, but I suspect the strongest opposition is to having, you know, if Rust 2021 still had sort of this inconsistent where if you don't use a visibility qualifier, then you get wacky behavior, and if you do, you get normal behavior. That's a non-starter, or that would for sure be bad. If older editions have some hybrid behavior, that might be okay. Well, that's my take. All right. Okay, so nobody opposes landing though with a feature gate, I don't think. Assuming we have a plan to follow up. So that comes back to that, and there were some volunteers. I guess we should just follow up with that. And we'll go look at who to ping. Renaming overlapping patterns lints. I feel like we FCP'd this. Or planned to, yes. So folks should check their boxes. Unused dot comments. Similarly, I feel like we resolved this, shouldn't we? No, I guess we never left any.
I think, Nico, you were going to kick off FCP close or something like that, but I'm not sure.
I was and I didn't. Okay, I will do it this time. Must bind. Josh, you pinged me about this, I think. What is this?
Yeah, I would be interested in this.
Oh, it's a variation of must use. This is just kind of waiting on the, or wasn't there I guess there wasn't an MCP or something.
Yeah, so we discussed this roughly 2 weeks ago, and I left a comment saying that we would think that a project group would be the right thing. I think due to a lack of documentation in some sense, there is sort of an open question as exactly what that project group needs to do to get started.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, so we should just talk on Zulip. There's that thread.
Yep.
Okay, taking some notes to myself. Arbitrary expressions in key value attributes at parse time. This is cool. This is probably insta stable, maybe not. Does anyone know?
Well, it's a parser change, so it's still gated like no attributes in the compiler will accept it for a semantic check, but proc macros can make use of it.
I see.
I always get scared at how much can show up in a macro once it's like, hey, do arbitrary whatever.
In general, I feel like this is a positive change. But
Yeah.
this motivation raises interesting questions about evaluation order. I guess it's not that interesting. It kind of has to be evaluated first. Well, does it? I don't know. Like, does doc get invoked with include stir having been expanded or not? I don't know. And we have to sort of settle that before we, if this is going to be insta-stable to procedural macros, we'd have to settle it, right? Has anyone looked closely at this? I'm just wondering how much this has already been discussed. Lower priority, okay.
I guess this doesn't make actually parsing anything any harder, because anything that you have to be able to parse outside one of these, that parsing Rust has to parse expressions. So if you have to parse expressions inside a attribute too, then, well, you already had to do that anyway.
Yeah, you have to be able to do it. I guess it may also raise, well, if this is the only place it's supported, yeah, it's probably fine. I was just wondering if there were any issues around, we've had problems with macros in the past where changing what is an expression created backwards incompatibilities because sort of where the expression finished was significant, right?
Yeah.
But I don't think that applies here because it ends with a closing brace.
Yeah, the closing bracket catches the rest of it. Does this do anything funky to parsing rules of what's like, sorry, I'm not coming up with exactly what I mean here. Any of the like turbofish disambiguating things around what's legal where, does this make any of those things more complicated or anything?
I don't see why.
Guess it's the same rules, and we're always going to refuse anything that's context sensitive that would need name lookup or whatever. So it has to work the same anyway. Yeah.
Right, more or less that. At least
Yeah,
the proposals.
I guess there is some question if you have like paths and so forth in these expressions, what kind of hygiene those have? Like if you put them in an impl block on a function, can you refer to like generics and so forth?
Yeah,
but
I think that's related to this question of like expansion order, right? It's kind of how much are these expressions that are really evaluated and how much are they sort of tokens that are shaped like expressions.
Yeah, I guess all of my complaints are actually about any semantics that we'd associate with the expressions in here and not necessarily about just letting them parse.
I think my only concern is that if they're exposed unstable, we're giving people semantics, or I don't know, some of those questions are affected, so we should raise them. All right, let's leave some questions and come back to it next week. I will post a question about compatibility. Anyone else wants to post questions? That should be good. Attribute on generic parameters. We talked about this once before, didn't we? I guess we said they should do a creator run, which we did. No regressions. I think we should probably just do this. Does anyone remember what it is? Does everyone remember what it is? It's basically making these, detecting the fact that like an inline attribute on a generic type parameter has no effect. And warning about it.
I think it's a hard error. But
Oh, I see. I'm wrong. It was already detected and given a warning, and now it's giving a hard error. Okay. Right. So it gives us room to give that semantics later if we want to. Seems okay. Someone want to FCP merge then? Felix, I nominate you. I don't know why.
Okay.
You added those attributes and.
Well, that's what I'm actually sitting here going like, okay, does this still support Matango? But sure.
It does, or else it wouldn't.
It must. It must. So sure.
Okay. All right, 79270, acknowledge that const n is stable. So I guess the special case of Has anyone read into this or have thoughts on it? I haven't yet, but I'm reading it now. Like, I'm trying to bring back the context though, and I'm failing to do so. I'm going to vote. Can we assign someone to look into this? Come back.
can you say more? It seems like a sort of obvious thing to stabilize, like if there's no problems with it.
I don't know. I just wanted someone to like present the context. If there is any, I don't know if there are problems with it. Like, I don't remember what RFC 2203 says, for example. And how it works within. I guess if Ralph's in favor, I'm probably fine because Ralph, I know, is leading this charge here. And he wouldn't accidentally introduce some implicit promotion complications. So I would be okay with FCP merging as well. And then I can do that research on my own time. I guess there's a question. Does anyone not want code like this to compile? So the main point is that it's a constant, but its type is not copy. But we nonetheless accept it because we assume that all constants will come from some expression that could be reevaluated many times, side effect free, if necessary.
And this is just exactly a path to something that is actually a constant, not an expression, or anything more complicated than that.
I think that's right. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, seems fine.
The only complication I can see is that at some point, I'm trying to remember, at some point we talked about the idea of actually allowing you to generate data structures like vectors and hash tables that do allocations that get reified. That was probably all a kind of a pipe dream that would never come to reality. But if it did, it would interact here.
It seems like we want this to work if you put a const block or anonymous const or whatever we're calling it in there anyway, right?
Yeah, it should probably work for, yeah. And I was, when you have generic constants, right, there's a certain set of expressions that you can pass as the value for a generic constant without having to use braces. And I feel like it might be nice if that same set of expressions worked here. I think that includes literals and paths.
Yeah, it would feel silly to me in this case to have to put const brace empty close brace.
Yeah.
Instead of just say empty and we're dead.
Yeah, and I guess by that argument, there's no complications that could be introduced that aren't already present by supporting other kinds of expressions here. So. All right, let's FCP merge. Scott, do you want to do it?
Sure, sounds like I do.
All right. Add. So I opened this PR. I'm wondering what this last thing is. Add unstable may ignore attribute. Let's see. I'll just talk about this briefly. So as part of the never type work, we were working on a lint to warn about fallback where changing from unit to never might generate unsoundness or otherwise change the behavior of code. And in digging into that lint seemed like it was hard to get it to, as I wrote in my write-up, it was kind of becoming hard to find a good lint that would avoid false warnings while also catching the cases we wanted to catch. So I proposed in this PR an alternate scheme, somewhat more complicated, where the fallback for type inference actually depends on how the coercions work out. So this is the unsoundness case, where you wind up having like a match. There's basically a type variable gets created here, and here another type, or here you have the never type, and these both get coerced into a common type, let's call it M. And what happens then is if this never sort of falls back to never, then M becomes never, and because M is never, then T becomes never. And so then you get this default creating an instance of never, even though that's sort of a surprising inference. And that would cause compilation to stop in this case because default is not implemented for never. But if it were implemented maybe by panicking, it could cause a panic to happen. And in one case, at least, it resulted in unsound execution. So what this proposal does is make it fall back to unit. And the rule is basically, if you have a type variable, which is the target of coercions from other type variables that are not, how to explain this best? Let me start from the other side. If you have a never coercing into a type variable, then everything that is kind of dominated is only coerced to, all the type variables that are only coerced to from never types fall back to never. And if they're targeted both from sort of variables outside of that set and from never types, they fall back to unit. And if they're not targeted at all, they just don't fall back. That's the proposal. I'm running a crater run now. It seems to make, I'm trying to find the other example. It seems to make all the cases work. And in particular, there was this regression we had where falling back to unit was causing a problem because it had to be in combination with changing infallible, I think, but basically because, here's the standalone example, is very clear. Because here, this type was going to be inferred to whatever type never got coerced to and never would be coerced to unit, which was kind of surprising. Very surprising that this variable would get inferred to unit, I think. That doesn't happen in this code because that variable is only coerced to from never values, so it becomes never. That's all I have to say about the idea. I guess we can wait and see what the crater results are, but I would love to get people's like initial reactions. I guess the only other thing I would add is that I wouldn't mind, I would sort of like it if we could deprecate the fallback in patterns like this, sort of cases where it would fall back to unit. I think it wouldn't fall back at all. Like, to me, it's surprising that default doesn't give you a type error here saying this is not specified what, like it's not constrained what type to default to. There's even more confusing examples where this match isn't there, but you just put a question mark and you get kind of the same behavior because the match gets created by the question mark desugaring. But I haven't explored how hard it would be to deprecate that. I would love to do so though, and maybe I think that the PR gives some approach to deprecating it and maybe even giving automated suggestions for like insert a type hint here, building on the machinery we already have for that.
Removing the fallback does seem pretty reasonable if it can be done.
Yeah, we'd have to try it out. Ideally, it would be like an addition boundary thing where fallback goes away in the newer additions.
Right.
That would probably be something to do later. Start by warning about it.
I like that this would pretty much automatically do the right thing for the case of I've written okay, what the heck is the error type?
Yes. Oh, this is an interesting, by the way, as a random bit of code that's affected. If you write this pattern, you've actually not specified what is the okay type, I think, or maybe I'm confused now that I say this out loud. Never mind. there is definitely existing code that does stuff like this, you know. I don't know. I think something like that compiles today and falls back to unit, but only because only because of the fact that you put a question here.
It feels like it would be the error one that would be the more likely thing because people would just put a semicolon after it and
yeah, for sure. I'm trying to remember if
do a bunch of odd things.
I think it's the same. I think that if you write I think I'll have to double check this, but I think that because of this mechanism, writing code like that will default to unit today, which is convenient as it happens. It would still default to unit under this proposal, but if we deprecated the default, then this
Well,
could,
it would also be kind of convenient if it defaulted to bang because
yeah, it doesn't really
it's
matter.
unreachable in a way.
It kind of doesn't matter what it defaults to in this case. It would be nice, yeah. Bang might be or never might be the ideal choice, but that's not what this code would do because it is live.
But mostly I think it's just awesome that you've come up with something that might let us do stabilize never type try for.
Yeah. It does have one other I should clarify that it does change behavior in some cases. Yeah, like this one, where here today we fall back to, this is kind of the inverse of the regression that we saw before, like falling back to unit is what we do today, and it only compiles because of that in this example. And if it started to fall back to never, which it would stop compiling. That's partly why I'm doing the crater run to see if that actually happens anywhere. I think in the past we haven't seen that being very common. So. All right. Well, we're out of time. I guess people should take a look, and if they have concerns, let me know. I'd like to hear about them. I would like to see never get stabilized. And we'll come to this one next week, I guess. Thanks, everyone. Bye.